Simon Smart, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for chatting to me today. Where are you phoning in from?
I'm in North Sydney in the offices here from my work at Centre for Public Christianity. So, yeah, it's a nice sunny morning.
Lovely. Nice one. And quite possibly the most important question for our conversation. What's your coffee order for when I can finally duck over and buy your coffee?
Yeah, my coffee order is a decaf cappuccino. Turns out I'm not that good with caffeine as it turns out. So, no, these days that's pretty boring, but that's what I do. I like coffee, like the texture, the smell, the kind of
The concept.
the concept. But yeah, it's decaf. So some people bag you about that, right? But it's
That's
okay.
You could have worse
You
trade.
could definitely have worse, and these days. But yeah, no, it's pretty simple though.
Amazing. And a book that has made you stop and reconsider a few things in your life.
Well, yeah, it's a difficult question because I think it's sort of different phases of your life. Different books have an impact on you, don't you think? So one that it really changed the way I thought about things was by a guy called Eugene Peterson, who is a pastor and a theologian, who wrote a book called Christ Plays in 10,000 Places, which was picking up from a Jared Manley Hopkins poem, which has a line that says, Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his. And it was all about seeing and experiencing God in all sorts of surprising places and having eyes to see that, I guess. And in a sense, and this was what was really helpful for me, was seeing kind of the sacred, but within the mundane, the everyday of life. And Peterson was a sort of very good at drawing that out, I think. So it actually did change the way I thought about lots of things. It was quite influential.
Fantastic. And there's something in that, I think, about just slowing down and just seeing
Yeah.
awe and wonder. And I was having a conversation
Yeah.
about a month ago with a gentleman called Oliver Berkman, who wrote a book, 4,000 Weeks.
Mm.
That
Yes.
that absolutely changed my perspective.
Mhm.
It caused me to slow down a little bit, hug my kids and my wife a little bit tighter, and
Mhm.
that there is awe and there is wonder in the mundane. So it seems like there's a similar thread there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work at all.
I'm not, although I did hear about this quite recently, and it did seem to cohere at least somewhat with the sort of thing that Peterson was on about. And I think that capacity for wonder,
Yeah.
which we all have, but we can lose it a bit. Like, you can lose it and just get overwhelmed by the busyness of life and forget just the miracle of life in itself.
Yeah.
And I often used to think when I had little kids, my kids are a bit older now, they're like 20 and 22, but you re-see that wonder when you go for a walk with a little tiny kid. Because they're just fascinated by everything. They're looking around, picking up leaves and looking at how amazing they are, and just sort of thinking, yeah, it is actually amazing.
Yeah.
You can forget that.
Is there a way that you are trying to cultivate a little bit more of that? So either slowing down or appreciating wonder in your life? I know from my point of view, I'm trying to not be the first person to let go from a hug. My little
Yeah.
It just
Uh,
loves hugging, which is great. But I'm trying to be the last to let go. But is there something that
yeah.
you're doing in your life that's kind of helping you to slow down or helping you to embrace that wonder a bit more?
It's a couple of things. So I was given this advice by Andy Crouch, who's an American author and
Yeah.
speaker and writes a lot of technology. And one of the things he said is that he every morning, no matter where he is, no matter what he's doing, he will make sure he goes outside before he ever engages with any sort of technology like his phone or anything like that.
Love
And
that.
so I've tried to do that a bit as well. So just, get up, go outside. It could be raining, could be cold, whatever, just to recognize that you are in creation, that you are a creature, and do that. So and going for long walks with my dog near the beach is it does remind me of the wonder of life and existence. Yeah, so that's been helpful for me too.
Great. And what are you most grateful for from your family? What have they taught you before we move into your amazing?
Mm. Well, I was very fortunate to grow up in a really pretty stable, loving family. I had two brothers, two older brothers, and so it's three boys and a mum and dad. I've come to realize, and you don't realize it until later in life, do you, that what a gift that is to have stability in your family, real welcome, a place, a sanctuary to return to. As you get older, you realize a lot of people don't have that or didn't have that.
Yeah.
And so I'm very grateful for that. There's lots of things I'm grateful for, but that would be one. I'm a person of faith, and so it was a household that was able to convey a vision of the world
Yeah.
that I've come to adopt, but it was in a way that can be done badly sometimes, but I think it was done in a way that was very generous and welcoming and not pressuring. So that was a gift too.
That's really great. And a final kind of getting to know you question. What's something that you've changed your mind about? It could be within your area of expertise, or it could be more.
I've changed my mind about winter. I used to hate winter.
Take it away.
I used to hate winter and only ever think I was a summer person. But I've tried to adopt, Matthew, a more positive attitude towards winter. I think it's helped.
Yeah.
It helps that I like surfing, so winter, it's usually better surfing in winter than summer. So that's helped with my change of attitude. But yeah, no, I still love summer, but I've tried to
Love it.
not be so negative about the cold.
Love it. I've changed my mind about hot Christmases. I was born in the UK and it's taken me,
Yes.
gosh, probably 27 years to appreciate a warm Christmas.
Yeah,
So
I understand that.
it's just
I had a properly winter Christmas a few years ago in Canada in the snow.
amazing.
And all of a sudden, all those Christmas traditions made sense in a way that they probably hadn't before. So I get it. I get why that might have been a challenge for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we were sitting down at a barbecue, and I know it's a terrible question when you're trying to find out about somebody, but if I asked you, what do you do? How would you respond to that question?
Well, I'll tell you what would happen. If my wife was anywhere near us when you asked me that question, she'd roll her eyes and walk off to find someone else to talk to, because there's no short answer to what I do. And it would depend on the context, honestly. So I'm the director of the Centre for Public Christianity, which is a media company that tries to promote the public understanding of the Christian faith, but to do it in a way that's generous and respectful and thoughtful. But you can imagine, Matthew, depending on who you are, that might immediately draw down the shutters and think, oh my gosh, get me out of here if you're talking to someone who says that to them. So I'll have to discern, what might be the wisest way to at least introduce that, it could be a bit, it could in some people's minds ring some alarm bells. There's some sort of freak.
But it's either
yeah. And I'm sort of joking, but it's honestly often not that. Like if I talk about what we do, which is producing podcasts and documentaries and writing books and trying to I sometimes describe it as looking at the way in which religion, in my case, the Christian religion, intersects with contemporary life and how that can be a life-giving thing. People very often actually go, oh, yeah, that sounds interesting. And they'll often ask a follow-up question. And then, often you'll have very interesting conversations.
fantastic. And you have just recently written a book. Tell me about that. I don't know how on earth you find the time to write a book, but tell me about the book that you've just written, and would love to spend a little bit of time unpacking it in a few moments. But why write this book and why write it now?
Yeah, so the book's called The End of Men with a question mark, and it's deliberately been a bit provocative, but it's trying to speak into this question around masculinity today and what does it mean to be a boy or a young man in the current environment. And I was just trying to contribute something positive, sort of inject something positive into a discussion that I think is quite emotive and often negative. And so I was trying to talk about the place and the plight, if you like, of boys and young men today in an environment that I think is increasingly complex and sometimes confusing. And felt like I wanted to say something into that. And I realized it's a bit of a treading in dangerous territory. But I thought, no, I think there's some things to say here. So I wanted to do that. And so in this little book, it's in a series that we produce here called the Reconsidering series, which asks you to look at a familiar topic from perhaps a different angle. And we've got a few of those. And so this was my sort of contribution to that series.
And I am currently looking at a couple of those. I think there's the cost of compassion, the end of thinking, the achievement addiction. So my wife also works within your organization, and so our
Yeah.
house full of these incredible reads. And I applaud you for taking on such an important and also challenging topic. And you write in your book about the experience of visiting Flossenburg concentration camp. So how did that shape you, and what were some of the lessons that you learned from that? Because that forms a foundational part of this book.
So I went to Flossenburg concentration camp as part of I was filming a documentary. We were filming a documentary, a historical documentary on the history of Christianity. And we were looking at the good and the bad. So the documentary is called For the Love of God, How the Church is Better and Worse Than You Ever Imagined. So I was trying to look at across the sweep of history.
Seems like you seem to enjoy challenging topics.
Yes. Well, it's an important question, really, because people rightly will say, well, you talk about Christianity, and you want to say some of the things that you think is important and valuable in that. But what about the Crusades and the witch trials and the oppression of women and the Inquisition and all the terrible failures of Christian history, the failures of people who, are Christian to live up to what they say they believe. And so we wanted to take that on that topic and to acknowledge those failures, because there's histories that are littered with them, isn't it? And so they're undeniable failures. There's also a really good story that runs all the way through Christian history, and so we wanted to tell that as well, of people who took their faith really seriously and because of that made incredible contributions to the world. And so he did, and the story that we told in the German church under Nazism reflects all of those things, actually. Mostly failure, but also a couple of shining lights of people who truly and courageously and sacrificially took on that terrible regime because of their faith. And so Flossenburg concentration camp is the place where Dietrich Bonhoeffer was hanged by the Nazis 3 weeks before the war ended. Gosh. Because of his role in a plot to assassinate Hitler. So Bonhoeffer was a German academic, theologian, and pastor. And so probably a quite unlikely hero, if you like. He's not your classic, typical masculine hero. He could have remained in this ivory tower, if you like. But he saw, and he wrote about this very beautifully, he saw the love of neighbor as an essential duty of his Christian faith, to the extent that sometimes loving your neighbor involves even getting down and dirty in a way to defend the vulnerable and people who were suffering. So he risked and then paid for his life in order to do that. And everything about it was a life oriented towards the other person rather than self. So instead of just protecting yourself, you're driven by this idea that the full life involves service of others. And so he becomes, and I sort of wrote about this recently in the Guardian, where I was trying to talk about what Christianity offers to the world when it comes to this question of where does the full life come from. Yeah. And I linked it to the masculinity book because my thesis is that if we can create environments and cultures whereby boys capture a vision of life where they see service and care and love of the other person, not just love for self, as a really full, rich and interesting, engaged life, everyone will be better.
Simon, I mean, there's so many points in that, and I would just love you to tell me about your experience at school and whatever happened to Raddy Gardner and Chomper, who are two characters which appear in the first half of your amazing book.
Yeah, I went to a school. It was an agricultural boys' boarding school, and it was, let's say, a robust environment. It was actually, and I talk about this book in the book as a place which was, I've come to realize, I wouldn't say I realized it at the time, but I've come to realize that it was such a limiting, narrow culture when it came to understand what it is to be a boy growing into a man. And And as I got older, I kind of got more and more resentful of this, actually. It was a brutal environment, Matthew. I could tell you stories, you just probably think, oh, he's got to be exaggerating. But it was a very, very tough environment. Lots of people were happily existed there and were fine, but anyone who was a bit unusual, a little bit not like everyone else, or who was a bit weaker or whatever, really copped it. And it was a tough environment. So yeah, I mentioned a couple of characters that just stick out in my mind as people who suffered terribly in that
Were you
place.
people, Simon, that thrived in that environment, or did you find you had to put on a certain persona to, yeah,
Yeah, it was you knew how to survive. You learned how to survive, I think. I was lucky. I had older brothers. I was really into sport, which mattered a lot in that environment. Um, and so you're sort of considered, okay. But at the same time, there's this sort of threat of violence really in the air. And you knew that you didn't have to stray too far from the accepted model to draw the kind of attention of the mob, if you like. And it was terrible. And there were some good parts to it as well. Um, but I've come to see this huge lack. And what could have been done differently with the right leadership, it just feels really like a real lost opportunity. And what I make this point right at the beginning of the book, that I go through all these terrible things, and then I say, and it's meant to have an effect. I say, I hope it has when you read it,
yeah, it does.
that I loved it. I was in this environment that was kind of misogynist and brutal and cruel and so on. And I loved it, because the point is, at the time, I didn't know any different. And my whole argument here is that boys won't just know how to be good men. They have to be shown. And I'm a big believer in this, in the sense that it wasn't the fault of those boys who were shown nothing better. And I came to contrast that with another, when I became a teacher years later, in another all boys environment, which was imperfect, but a universal way from what I'd experienced, in the sense that it had such a broader picture of what it is to be a boy growing into a man, a celebration of huge range of different ways you could be that, different skills and interests and abilities and so on. And just a so much richer understanding of that. And an environment where at least the ideal was, let's protect and look after and bring along those who are a bit, who might be weaker, if you like, rather than punish them. And so, these two contrasts, they're vivid contrasts in my experience. And it just underlined for me the fact that adults have to find ways, and everything since then has confirmed this for me. They have to find ways to cultivate environments. They're going to increase the likelihood of a boy growing into the kind of man you would want to be around if you were, a child or a teenager or a woman, or indeed another man. Like this is what I'm trying to drive at.
I mean, I read this. I've got a copy of your book in front of me, and I read it, and it's full of highlights and full of arrows and question marks. And I know even like one of the things that really stood out to me, as you mentioned, is you said it was an atmosphere of crippling fear and the threat of violence that loomed like a dark cloud over all of us. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I could not imagine as a parent sending your child to that. But also, I'm not judgmental, because I know that was a system that was very common, and thank goodness it's changed. But tell me about some of the shifts that had to occur in you when you went from that environment to then to the school that you taught at, in terms of creating that environment, that positive environment for kids. Because did you feel? I think what I'm trying to ask is when we see a certain way of masculinity displayed, it's very easy for that cycle to repeat itself.
Yes, it is.
What changed with you in terms of?
Yeah, the difference for me was that it wasn't all that I'd seen. It's funny because my dad was nothing like that. He was and is great, lovely, loving man. Also, and I try to emphasize this in the book, I had other older separate from school, from other parts of my life. I had older men who I could look up to who had very different, again, presented a very different picture of this. People who were interested in me, who showed that they cared about what I was into and interested in what I'd love to do, which at that stage pretty much was just sport. That was all I did. But they held out, or without saying much, they just showed a different way to be. And so I was lucky in that way. And so it wasn't for me, it wasn't a big kind of crunch or gear change for me to see a very different environment and to get absorbed into that or excited by that. But I just recognized that for others, they didn't have that. They weren't shown a different way. That's why I think it's so important to be intentional about how we go about creating these sort of environments, because you could have done so much at that place that could have been really life-changing, life-giving.
Yeah, and I think about, as I mentioned before we hit record, I'm the dad of two daughters, one of which came into work with my wife this week, so she enjoyed her. I don't know if it was the most productive day for my wife, but she loved having our little one. And I think about like what it means to be a dad, and especially to little girls. And quite often it involves, for me, dancing around our lounge room, listening to a range of pop songs. It involves singing, it involves wrestling, it involves all these different things. And I think about, I'm so glad that notion is shifting, because my dad was wonderful, was definitely not authoritative, but I know his dad was from a completely different generation. And so I think it's so important that notion is changing.
And it has changed a lot, even things like, even in my lifetimes, massive shifts have taken place in terms of exactly what you're talking about, like men's involvement with their kids, which is hugely different from when I was young. And that's been a really great development. And so, it's what was interesting. I've talked to a bunch of people about this. I remember a guy called Andrew McCutcheon who runs a thing called the Fatherhood, and he's trying to just develop. And there's a few of these sorts of organizations trying to help people become the best fathers they can be, or father figures. And he said one interesting thing for him, and this sort of resonated a bit with me, was that when he got into a position where he's trying to be a good dad, and he's talked to his dad about it, his dad said, I've got nothing to, I don't know. We didn't do anything, we weren't involved the way you are. And so this idea that you do need to then pass on the wisdom that you've had. And my wife and I try to do this. We're not by any means are we trying to convey some sense of we knew what to do, other than lessons we've learned along the way. It's more that, and so if ever we see people with young kids, and we try to just offer a bit of encouragement too, but also if they ever want to ask, sometimes you think, well, there's things you've learned that are worth passing on, I think.
I love that. And I had the privilege in my wonderful school of heading up the Fathering Project, which is
there we go. Yeah.
Run by a gentleman called John Kirkland. And it's a really wonderful organization. And we're having these conversations at school about what projects do we persist with and what projects do we continue with. And the Fathering Project is one of those ones that we all, as an executive team, thought was really important. And I think providing an avenue for dads or father figures to be involved in their kids' lives is so important. I mean, we've learned that free food really helps. And so we put in a barbecue, and a couple of weeks ago had over 100 parents. And for our school, in quite a complex environment, that's hugely successful. And it's really lovely to start to have those conversations around what it means to be a present father. And I'm so glad that these ideas, in many ways, these archaic ideas of masculinity are slowly kind of beginning to drop off. But you did also write in your book that some experiences irreparably damage young men, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that you were able in many ways to take quite a negative experience and make it a positive one, because in many ways of your upbringing and the different models of fathers that you saw. I think it is important to acknowledge that for some people they do just continue that cycle, which I think is quite challenging.
They really do. And I've watched, though, and this is sort of in terms of positive part to some pretty rough things. I have seen people, and I'll mention a few of them in the book, people who suffered terribly in some of these environments that weren't very positive, um, and don't pretend that it hasn't damaged them for a very long time, but they've been able to find some degree of healing, some degree of redemption, often by becoming something different from what they were exposed to. I always like that sort of story, actually. You're
Yeah.
right that lots of people just repeat the cycle. And this is what I'm largely talking about. We want to find ways to break those cycles
Yeah.
and introduce boys to a different way of being than they've sometimes been exposed to. And it's a big challenge. I mean, I think boys have, in some places and in some cultures and whatever, have had done so much differently from what I saw when I was a kid. But there's still people really who are in a very negative, restrictive vision of what it is to be male. My son and his mates and my daughter and her male friends, I see it's hugely different to what I grew up with, and really, lovely boys, broad thinkers, creative, emotionally intelligent, supportive of each other, this sort of stuff, which I love to see. But I recognize that it's not everywhere like that, and there are lots of boys who just haven't been given much of a vision of something
And I
more
think it's really,
expansive.
yeah, and I think it's really important that you argue that simply saying that masculinity is toxic is maybe a little bit too simple. And I love the
Mm.
idea that you kind of reframe it and say what we need to talk about is positive masculinity, because I think it's so easy just to like write people off or to say, you know what, that's toxic, but that actually doesn't solve the problem, does it? It's more of a full stop as opposed to a comma. Yeah.
Yes. It's lazy language, actually. And because we're all painfully aware of truly toxic behavior. And there are massive challenges here. In the time I was writing this little book, it's only a little book, but it took a while to get through it. But in the time that I wrote it, the stats on domestic violence and people being killed by their intimate partner have ground on relentlessly, Matthew, and so depressingly. So, one a week at least in Australia. It's shocking. So and then stats around sexual assault and so on. Yeah, it's grim. So there's that side of it. The other side is that, and that's a very disturbing thing that we need to attend to. And then the other side of it is, and they're probably related, is that the boys are falling behind the girls in so many measurements. And the incredible, brilliant advances we've made in the last 4 decades for girls has been absolutely wonderful and really important. It's just now we just don't want to forget what's happening with the boys. And there are signs that they are struggling in a whole host of areas: health, stats, education. This will be important to you. Falling behind, you guys, you'd be aware of this, falling behind the girls in so many statistics when it comes to educational outcomes. There was a big, I mentioned this in the book, but there's a big study done by the University Admissions Centre that found that being male was greater than any other recognised disadvantage that they looked at. I mean, that's troubling. And then things like the suicide stats are just so terrible. And that's the one area the boys are far outstripping their female counterparts. Of the suicide stats I mentioned in the book, but they're just terrible and very alarming. So, the point is there is some terrible behavior, but it's not, we have to identify what it is and who's responsible and what's going on there. And it's more widespread than we would have imagined. There's also the struggle to be, who are we now? What are we meant to be as young men? I think that's a challenge.
It's really important. And I was having a conversation, recording an episode yesterday with Dr. Tim Sharp, who's he's called Dr. Happy, even though
Oh, yeah.
his Instagram bio to Doctor sometimes, but not always happy, because he thought misleading.
Right.
And he talked about that. And one of the conversations we're having is like, sometimes it is actually difficult, I think, as a man, to put your hand up and go, this is quite challenging. I mean, we both live in Sydney, which is exorbitantly expensive.
Yeah.
Trying to be present for our kids. I'm trying to pack lunches. I'm trying to pay for excursions. I'm trying to be a present husband and a good father and
Yeah.
lead a team at school. And I think sometimes it's difficult to say, and I'm very fortunate because we have a wonderful family and a wonderful home life, but sometimes it is difficult. But to be able to put your hand up and go, I need a little bit of help here is I think sometimes is a bit of a challenge. And I love
Mm.
that we're starting to have more of those conversations about support and networks and what it means, I think, to be a dad or to be a man. I think that is incredibly important. And you talk about a movie which is a favorite movie of mine, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. So why is this a favorite in your family? And yeah, what thoughts would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm glad you like that one too. Yeah, we've watched it more. Yeah, we don't watch movies, repeatedly, but that one we've watched over and over, and the kids just love it. And it wasn't that long ago we had a family night, and they said, "Hey, let's watch Walter Mitty again." For many reasons. I mean, it's a lovely story. It's
Yeah,
funny. It's about adventure and travel and about taking risks and embracing life. In the end, it's about kindness.
yeah,
And there's this hilarious character. It's played by Sean Penn in the film. And I just like that, and I talk about it in the book, but he's this sort of archetypal heroic male. He's distant and cool and remote. Only ever he's the photographer for Life magazine, you
yeah,
remember? And he's he's the legend wherever he's always in the most dangerous places in the world, and the films, the negatives come into the magazine often with blood stains on them and all this sort of stuff. And he's a great character, but it does bring up this question of, he's sort of the archetypal male, but it's probably, and it's making fun of it in a way. That's probably not the most helpful vision, because it's sort of this impossible thing to kind of live up to. And it also carries with it that distant, emotionally remote idea that I don't think has been helpful for us as we think about masculinity. And Walter Mitty himself is this sort of geeky kind of guy, but the kindness of him, but also the challenge for him to embrace life a bit more. I think it does capture a lot of things that I'm gesturing towards in this book. And I think about it when I think about what I would love my kids to become and the people around them to be. I honestly think being kind would be one of the highest on the list. So that's why I think of that film.
Well, we've got a couple of mantras in our house with our girls, and one of them, our surname is Green. The mantras is green girls are strong, green girls
Yeah.
are brave, and green girls are kind. And
Mm.
I think it can relate so much to that. I think about the things that I want for my children. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily about achieving things or getting a great job that pays well. I think it's that kindness and that
Mm.
servanthood towards other people, which is really important, which is kind of hard when you're trying to set a goal, when you're not really sure what the goal is other than a quality. But it is, I think it's
Yeah.
really, really important. And Simon, what you mentioned, you sort of touched on it briefly, but what does success mean for you now as a dad, as a leader of an organization, as an author? What does success look like? Because I can imagine that there would be so many things kind of vying for your time in terms of interviews. You've just released a book and meetings and important things to do. But what does success actually look like for you now at this point in your life?
Yeah.
Hard-hitting questions, sorry.
It's a it's a difficult question for me to answer. I think success these days. I bet I've changed what I would have thought, over the years. I think it would be as could I grow to the point where I truly was, and I feel like I've got a long way to go with this, where I was more outward focused than inward in terms of looking out for other people and deploying whatever I have, and this is something I've tried to emphasize in the book, is that deploying what I have, whatever skills and talent or interest or strength that I might have, it could be, I don't mean this for me necessarily, but it could be physical strength, but it could be, intellectual strength or emotional strength or some social, strengths you have socially, whatever they are, and however you've been wired up, but deploying those strengths
Mm.
in the service of other people. And we're not, are we, very naturally good at that? And mostly mostly I have, I'm selfish, think a lot about, myself and trying to grow as a person and mature, I think you start to have a different, a shift in emphasis. And so
Yeah.
I think success, honestly, would be me being able to be more and more like that. And that's a journey to be on.
Yeah, I think that's really profound. And as I said, for me, being a parent has changed me in ways that I didn't know I needed to changing. So
Right.
I think
I had a friend once who said becoming a parent was the first, this experience, the first truly selfless thought he ever had. It's this because it forces you to if you're going to be in any way a good parent, you are having to
mm,
think of other people more than yourself. And I hope that that experience is one where you see the richness of it, actually. You come to see the benefit of it. Because the things that I'm talking about, people like Hugh McKay, the social researcher, observes people their whole life, right? He's in his career. In his career, he's observed people his whole life. And he'll tell us that the only truly satisfying life is one that's oriented towards others. So it's wisdom it's ancient wisdom actually, but one that I think we'd all do well to take on.
and are there any other sort of learnings from ancient wisdom? I mean, you talk about like love as a framework, authority,
Mm.
ability. Is there anything else that we can kind of pull from some of the ancient sources?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be any surprise given that I'm from the Centre for Public Christianity I'm unashamedly putting this forward in the book that you could look carefully at the life of Jesus and see him as in this case, because I am talking about boys and men, healthy masculinity. And there's a way in which he and Andy Crouch writes about this in a book that he wrote. The way in which, and he's emphasizing the fact that this is a good thing, a good way to and embraces his full humanity, which means vulnerability as well as agency or authority, if you like. His whole life is bookended by vulnerability. Born as a tiny, vulnerable child, you don't get more vulnerable than that. Ends in this terrible crucifixion on a Roman cross. And everything in between has a sort of agency, though, where he's embracing both of those things. So he's very human, he feels emotion, he feels despair, he feels anger, he feels grief, feels joy, he feels celebration in his life, all those sorts of things. He's oriented towards other people all the time. So he's about service and as I say, deploying what he has in the service of other people. So I think that's an ancient life that it doesn't date, right? It's still, you can look at that life and think that applies as much in 21st century Australia as it does at any time in history. And
Yeah.
so, irrespective of your theological position on the life of Jesus, I do think you can look at that and see, wow, this is the kind of life that is what he said, which was the full. He said, "I came to bring life and life to the full," and I think he provides a brilliant model for that.
I love that. And you also talk about the work of Steve Biddulph in his book, The New Manhood.
Mm.
Did you include references to that, and what can we learn from his work?
Well, Steve Biddulph's really interesting because 20 or 30 years ago, he started writing about boys. And Steve Biddulph's a psychologist. He's done all this work looking at the place of boys. So it's good to read what he wrote 30 years ago and then what he writes more recently. And the progression, like there's been huge development. And he sees this. He sees the way that men are much more affectionate. They'll talk more openly. They're more emotionally attuned. He highlights the work of, as you've said, Matthew, lots of these men's groups that are trying to help people think about what it means to be a healthy, contributing person. And so I find him very helpful. He talks about lots of things. One of the points that I then emphasize is this idea of the river of knowledge. So the passing on younger people the knowledge that's come from years of experience and wisdom being passed down, that's a very important thing that's probably neglected. And he's calling on us to be much more attuned to that. I think that's really true. And he notes that it depends what's being passed on in that river too. Like you can be passing on very negative things and things that aren't going to contribute to the thriving of our communities. But the opposite can be true too. And so I think he's been a very important person in this area. And it's nice to see that he's identifying real progress in the last 20 or 30 years. But he would equally say there's a bit of a way to go in it.
Absolutely. The majority of people listening to this are teachers. And
Mm.
I was just wondering sorry, what are some of the implications of your work for how teachers can do a better job working with their students in terms of how they frame what it is to be male, what it is to be a contributing member of society? But do you have any thoughts on that? Because teachers are those people that are really at the forefront of helping to shape and helping to build the
Mm.
next generation of citizens. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I absolutely agree. I mean, one thing I'd say initially is I think teaching's such a challenging job, and I think it's gotten harder and harder in the last several years. So I'm not wanting to put more onto teachers and more responsibility because they have so much. But I'll just be, hopefully by way of encouragement, remind teachers of the incredible impact they can have for good or ill. I've seen both. And so I'd say that urge them to think, well, there's a real challenge here for the boys. It's an actual one we need to address. And perhaps to spark a bit of a deeper conversation about the particular challenges that boys have today, and therefore how best to assist them to deal with those challenges. You know, I make some suggestions in the book in terms of remedies that we can attend to. That could be a gift to the boys and then ultimately everyone else, because when boys are floundering, everyone tends to suffer. If they're not dealing with their pain well, the results of that can be pretty serious. So trying to think about the boys, pay attention to them. I spoke to a head of a school, a very experienced head of a school in south coast part of New South Wales, public school. And he said, develop these mentorship programs for boys in particular, because he said what he was finding was every week stuff would come across his desk that would be helping the girls, programs that would get girls doing better in a whole lot of areas. And he's all for that, and it's been great. But he did say there's nothing for the boys. And so he started to implement these things and try to pay attention to this. I think it's an important area. So I just encourage the teachers to recognize it, identify it, and start to think of what can be done in their particular context to address real needs that the schools can make a massive difference. It's not everything. I think, there's bigger community issues and, family and so on, but schools can make a big difference. And even being that presence, that positive presence of lots of males. And I think it'd be good to see more young men getting into teaching actually, but they need some encouragement. It's not, maybe not the most attractive career in the way it's rolling at the moment. I know there's big teacher shortages. But
Yeah.
that'd be my encouragement, I guess, that there's lots that can be done, that there's a need and lots that can be done.
Fantastic. And we talked about some of the challenges that you experienced at school, but I'm sure there were some really positive moments. And was there a teacher that made a difference in your life?
Undoubtedly. So I had despite what I said earlier about my schooling. No, I had a couple of really, really great teachers, especially one who was a seriously dedicated teacher, but it was probably in the extracurricular stuff that, he was my cricket coach for a long time, who really made a big difference. He's the sort of person I love to see now, this far down the track, because and it was probably just he was dedicated. He was very passionate about what we were doing and put in a lot of extra time to help us and was very interested in us as people. And so, yeah, I remember him, and he made a big difference. I had another English teacher who was very good. And the things he taught me in year 7, I remembered. And that's rare, I think.
So I've had the privilege of having a conversation on the podcast with the teacher that changed my life, a lady
Oh,
called
yes.
Jones.
Awesome.
I still can't call her Beth after all.
No, nor should you.
No, and I actually don't remember what she taught me. And I now supervise the year that I was when I was in her class. So there's probably a bit of fractions in there, probably a little bit of um,
Yeah.
a couple of recounts thrown in. But I don't remember what she taught me, but I remember how I felt when I went into her classroom. And the lovely thing is that there is now a Facebook group with hundreds of students, hundreds of former students from her class, and they all had the same sentiment that we
Yeah.
felt heard and valued, and like the most important person in the room.
Hmm.
How did you feel when you were interacting with some of those teachers that really made a difference in your life? What were some of the emotions that?
Yeah. Well, everything you say there, I think is exactly right. You always remember the teachers. That's another daunting thing for the teacher because the teacher won't remember all the students. There's too many, aren't there? Um, but kids will always remember the teacher. I had a terrible one in fourth class who was truly awful, and I can never forget that because it was a fear and humiliating, and it's just dreadful. So I remember him, but the ones where you remember who they were interested in you as a person, they you sort of felt safe, and I don't know, something nurturing, isn't there, about a really good teacher, and it's also taking you seriously as a person. So, and sometimes that involves seriously enough to call you to account to things that you haven't lived
Yeah,
up to, but it's done in a particular way where you think they actually are caring about your development. They're interested in you as a person. And it's worth remembering that a lot of kids won't have that in their life anywhere else.
yeah,
It's possibly another reason why they will remember it so powerfully. I love hearing those stories of teachers like you're describing because I think it just is a great testament to the impact of a teacher. Steve Bidoff again talks about this. I remember hearing him give a talk on it. And one of the things was that he's trying to urge people to be very real with their students. I mean, there's important professional, kind of distance, but nonetheless, sharing a bit of who you are
yeah.
was crucial. He said, I remember him talking about this guy who is his geography teacher, who once shared that his friend had died, and he said, lots of my friends are starting to die now because I'm old. He was an old guy. And he told the students what that felt like. And Bidoff says, I don't remember a single river of South America, but I've never forgotten that. That was something that really stayed with me. And that's what teachers everywhere, in all the busyness and the chaos and the sometimes what must be utterly exhausting work. Good to remember that too.
I love that. It's really important, and ever since I've started to have conversations with my students about my family or my girl starting school or
Yeah.
what's going on in my life, I found that that vulnerability has been really important. I
Yeah.
remember a conversation with a young man. He was in my office because he did the wrong thing, and I said, "Look, mate, like it's really hard when you feel like someone doesn't understand you, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Look, that must be really awful." And we just had a
Mm,
conversation. I said, when I was,
mm,
I felt the same. I felt like no one really got me. And
yeah.
so I think sharing that vulnerability is really, really crucial. And so, Simon, I'm so, so grateful that you'd give me some of your time today. It has been wonderful having a conversation. Your book, The End of Men, is a really powerful read and also a really quick read. I read it in about a day.
Yeah.
And since gone back and looked at it again. And thank you for your vulnerability in that and your contribution to such an important conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time today.
Oh, Matt, it's been really good chatting to you. Appreciate you giving it some time.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Matt.